know that you have self-identified you as a reluctant reader, and that you have worked specifically to help reluctant readers, and in fact, you have raised someone who has a reading disability that you've been able to help with that as well. So, what is the key to reaching out to a reluctant reader and getting them into the world of fiction?
I think it's getting away from I like a book, so you must like a book. I like to read, so you must like to read also. It just doesn't work like that, you know. It's the same way that you might like a certain TV show and someone else really doesn't. And I think for certain kids, um, particularly kids with a reading disability, and the percentages are all over the place, but it's as much as 20%, sometimes more. Um, they have a reading disability that just doesn't get diagnosed. I saw it in my own daughter. It's very difficult to spot. And the way it presents itself is in someone who goes, I don't like to read, or someone who may read a paragraph in a history book or something, and they'll read it, but they won't comprehend any of the information that is in it. So you have to work around that kind of uh, that comprehension level, and you have to instinctively sort of know, okay, it can't be too dry, or it needs to be conversational in a way, what they're reading. And there's lots of different, I could go on for like an hour about this stuff, but basically you want to sit down and meet that reader where they are, instead of trying to make them do something that you want them to do. And part of our problem is, for publishing and for educating as well, a lot of the people who are in that business or in that job love to read. So they come from a certain perspective and from liking a certain type of book, a book that's maybe, going to win awards, or um, a book that's kind of the perfect book for that kid that sits in a corner quietly and reads. Well, that's not a reluctant reader. So if you want to reach those kids, you have to change your own mindset to an extent, and think about, okay, just because I like to read this big fat book doesn't mean that kid is going to like to read that book. How am I going to get them to read? And sometimes that's graphic novels, which is very exciting right now to see. There's so many great options for reading graphic novels. In my own books, I make sure there's lots of dialogue, there's lots of stuff happening. So it's not all about interior monologue, blah, blah. There's stuff happening on the page all the time. And that's going to hook a reluctant reader, something that a book that's very visual. All my books are basically, because I pick my setting carefully in the way that I just look at things, they're very visual books. So that's something that you want for reluctant readers. And I think it is so important because, particularly in middle grade, that's where you lose your readers. That's where you lose your particularly boy readers. Um, the kids give up on reading because the stuff that they read for required reading is boring, or it's just not something that they would enjoy to read, or to read for fun. So reading for fun disappears when you get to middle school, high school, a lot of the time, particularly for boys. And I think sometimes we just need to stop and make a better effort at trying to meet those kids where they are, and listening to what it is that they like. What are they into? I love during school visits to just ask what the kids are reading and what they are excited about. And then they're excited because you're validating the fact that, hey, you have an opinion. I'm not just here to tell you everything. What do you like? What are you into? And that's super fun, and I think super important, because even if you look at the statistics, reading is everything. It indicates college readiness, kids' ability to graduate high school, on lots of different levels. If you can get kids reading, every other subject starts to go better. They get better at math, they get better at science, because it wakes up your brain in many ways, that we just don't even understand yet. And as you can tell, it's a subject that I get excited about. I do a talk for librarians and teachers now on reaching reluctant readers, because I spent so much time researching the why of my daughter's reading disability, and then linking it to myself going, hey, I'm a reluctant reader and I like to read books that are action packed and that have some white space and that aren't this thick with a tiny font. And so, for me, this is a kind of a passion direction, so to speak, that I hope to hook those kids and get them reading. Even if there's nothing more exciting than getting a letter from a kid who's going, I hate to read, but I loved your book. And then you're kind of like, okay, maybe then they'll read the next book, and maybe they'll read the next, and they'll start thinking of themselves as readers, because that's really the goal.
It's been my experience that most adolescents cannot get enough of the symbolism and the color metaphor between Hester Prynne and Reverend Dimsdale. That's just the most exciting thing to them. More descriptions of forest, please, Mr. Hawthorne. Stop making kids read that book. You're choking the life out of them by boring them with these absolutely dreadful books that, they are noteworthy. You already have all of the study guides and the sheets made up. It makes the teacher's job easier, but you're killing their love of reading. You're teaching them this is something that who in their right mind would choose the whole library full of books? Who's choosing the Scarlet Letter that doesn't already know it's supposed to be one of the greatest things you'll ever read? That was my first time when I thought, you know what? I don't think these academics are 100% right.
No, exactly. And there's so much being published. We were just discussing the flood of stuff that comes out every year. There's so much exciting literature, because really all these authors, every single one that wrote the books that are coming out, poured their heart into it. It's at least a year of someone's life. That's what when I explain publishing to other people, and why I don't ever post a negative review is because I'm like, this is a year of someone's life. Even if I don't like the book, someone else might, unless it has to be pretty bad for me to even think about, posting something online about how bad the book is, because, it really is that tough. And there are so many really amazing books being published, which is a shame that that's not more of a focus in education. But that's a whole nother podcast right there.
Nope, we're going to do it right now. We're going to fix publishing. We're going to fix education.
We are.
Stuff out left and right.
just listen to us and we'll have all the solutions. Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned a lot of white space and a lot of dialogue. Is that because it makes the pages turn more quickly and builds confidence that look how fast I'm reading, or is there something beyond that to it?
It's that. It's the ability to visualize something, like something on the page. If you have action, it's easier to visualize than internal monologue. It's the reading itself, comprehending what's in a paragraph. Like some of the educational material, the nonfiction that's out there is just atrocious. When I was teaching my kids, because we were homeschooling, it was so difficult to find good material, well-written history material that felt like something a kid could understand. Because we would read things together and I would essentially translate what was on the page for my daughter. And it gave me a good understanding of what needs to be there and what not. So you need to try to find a way to write just in more approachable language. And it's sometimes really subtle. But it's the speed of reading, like the feeling that you are moving along, vocabulary sometimes, and just it being fun, a fun story. In my case, I love mystery, so fun mystery, something that will keep kids engaged because there's something happening on the page. And it doesn't mean you can't have character development. For Daybreak on Raven Island, I think the thing that I'm proudest of that book is the level of character depth. And that took a lot of work, but it's all woven into action. So the kids are always, so if you're seeing a part of someone's character, of Marvin, Tori, or Noah, if you're seeing something that makes them unique, or the character journey that they're going on, the character arc, it's woven into action. And you can do that. It just takes effort. It takes some skill to have something that the character's feeling manifest in what's happening in real time. So yeah, that's just one of the ways of reaching reluctant readers. I think the people that I know that do it very well don't necessarily actively think about that part. They just do. It's a certain style of writing, I think, that reaches that reader a little bit more easily.
Well, my hope is that the next time I sit down to write, I'll listen to this conversation a couple of times through, and I will, it'll just come to me like a moment of inspiration. Oh, what a brilliant idea I've just had. That was Fleur Bradley's idea.
I hope so. I hope so. It's fun. I mean, why not have something happen while, you know, you have your character think about something or realize something. But it's craft. It really is craft, and it takes hard work.
You mentioned that you want to focus on the visual, and I'm always I'm very wary of what I call sitting and thinking scenes. Anytime a character is sitting and thinking about the plot, that's exposition, that's lazy writing. Make something happen and introduce it that way. I'm 100% with you there. But what about the other senses? You mentioned visual. I assume that's primary. But is it as important to make sure that we know what the characters are smelling, tasting, hearing, all of that to create the sensory experience, or is that less of a concern for primary readers than getting to the action, or reluctant readers rather?
I put it in there, but you have to just be brief and sort of use your rule of threes. You know, if someone is describing a scene, pick three most prominent things. And I think I'm stealing that from Stephen King from his book on writing. But like in describing a scene, let's say you're walking into a room, what three things hit you first or are most descriptive about it? For me, it's a little bit easier to do that because my first draft tend to be kind of skeletons. So they're what's happening in the story, and that's it. And then I go back and I layer in a lot of the sensory detail. So it's easy for me to write that way and to write reaching reluctant readers because I don't do a great deal of it to begin with. So whatever I layer in, I can be very deliberate about. It's not like I have to cut a whole bunch of words or anything like that. So yes, you want your sensory stuff. You want, do want those moments where your character has an internal moment in response to maybe something that's happening in the plot. But you know, it's about sort of pacing that and making sure that it's not giant paragraphs of stopping a scene essentially to describe what's going on.
Maybe my mother did want what's best for me. She thought those as they exploded behind her. Ah, yes, there you are. Not sitting and thinking. Perfect.
Well, what's nice about this particular format that I've had for Midnight at the Barclay Hotel and for Daybreak on Raven Island is of three main characters. So I pick characters specifically who would not sit at the same lunch table. So they're very different. You know, they're not friends going into it. So that's a way for me to use the other characters in the scene to bounce things off of and to basically put pressure on each of these characters as they are dealing with whatever problem they're dealing with because they're around people who don't necessarily agree with them, who might do something that they would never do. For instance, Daybreak on Raven Island, Marvin jumps off the ferry and they miss the ferry to go home for the night. So he forces a very scared and anxious Noah to tag along essentially on this nightly trip on Raven Island, which is full of scary stuff. So it's the other characters you can use sometimes to show your, you know, they kind of are soundboards for each other. So it's a way for you to show character development and conflict by using the other ones in the room.
That's a first-rate tip right there.
Yeah, it's fun, you know.
And saves you some of the exposition traps that they have to get to know each other. So stuff that you want the reader to know would come up normally in conversation. Yes.
And I mean, it feels a bit like cheating when you're doing it because, you know, you're using all the other characters to sort of create conflict. but it is fun. I think the biggest challenge is to make sure when you have a multi character cast, so to speak, so I have 3 main characters, that you can relate to each of them. That it doesn't, you're as a reader, that you're able to connect to all 3 of those kids. That's the biggest challenge, because it's far easier to have one protagonist and have them be, the reason your reader shows up in a way. When you have 3, you're sort of splintered that. So that's a challenge, definitely. So there's pros and cons.
Well, on the upside, I've certainly not your books, but I've had the experience of reading a book where I hate that character. I really hate, but I like this one. So if you can get 2 out of 3, that ain't bad.
Yes, I've had it where it's like a dual thing where they go between 2 people, and I want to skip the ones of the character I don't like. Like this one I would like. Can we move along? So yes.
One great character can carry an entire ensemble.
Yeah, you just look at some of the TV shows out there.